Hello and welcome to A Genteel Black Hole, the home of my bookish rambles. My name's Ali, and although this is my booktube channel, I'm going to talk about music. So, bear with me. Medical Grade Music is a 2021 book by Steve Davis and Carvus Tarabi. It's a book all about weird music, things that are progressive, experimental, unpredictable, unexpected. And it's also a book about how the two authors became unlikely friends. Unlikely because, well, Steve Davis, if you're not familiar with him, is the six-time world snooker champion and was something of a celebrity, especially in the 80s, but still now, really. Carvus Tarabi, meanwhile, is a cult musician known for his work with bands like Gong, Knife World, Guapo, The Monsoon Bassoon, and for my purposes, most interestingly, Cardiacs. If you found this video looking specifically for the book, then you probably already know who Cardiacs are. If, on the other hand, you came to this just through BookTube in general, then there's a fairly strong chance you might not know Cardiacs. They're one of my absolute favourite bands. I've been a fan for about 20 years now, and it's not an exaggeration to say they completely rewired my brain. If you want to know more about Cardiacs, then I highly recommend this video by Tantacruel called Cardiacs, Why I Love Them. I'll put a link in the description, or hopefully up here somewhere if I can figure out how to do that. But it's a really good crash course into what makes Cardiacs so unique and special. And so if you want to know more about them, I highly recommend that video. So, being the massive Cardiacs fan that I am, when I realised that Carvus had co-written a book, I knew I had to read it, or in my case, I actually listened to it on audio. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, so I thought I would have a little ramble about it. So Stephen Carvus set out to write a sort of guidebook on how to get into the weirder, more experimental, more left field side of music. But what they actually ended up writing was more about their own personal journeys, a sort of joint biography through the lens of the music that they share such a passion for. And they also cover how they met, became friends, started co-hosting a radio show together, and then DJing live, and finally forming a band together, Steve Davis's first foray into making music using modular synthesizers. It's all completely improvised, so they're flying by the seat of their pants, which, as Steve mentions in the book, actually suits him better than trying to learn anything and play it back perfectly. He actually finds improvised music kind of has an element of sportsmanship to it that works for him. He describes himself as an adrenaline junkie, so going out there every night not knowing what he's even going to play actually kind of works for him. And you can hear the music that they've made together. Their band is called The Utopia Strong. I'll put a link to one of their tracks in the description as well, and it's surprisingly really good. Maybe it's unfair to be surprised by that, but considering Steve Davis has no background in making music, really, it's actually really good. But I digress. The book alternates chapters between Steve and Carvus, starting out with them each detailing their earliest musical obsessions. Steve talking about going to see Magma live, a band so weird that they sing in their own made-up language. while Carvus talks about his epiphany, realizing that he wanted to be a guitarist when he saw the Stray Cats on Top of the Pops, and then he later became a metalhead thanks to Iron Maiden, and then got into Voivod, and finally getting into Cardiacs, which, much like they did for me, rewired his brain. As a musician myself, as well as a massive fan of some of the weird music that they both share a passion for, especially Cardiacs, Gentle Giant, Henry Cow, I found it really interesting hearing them discuss how they got into that music, what it means to them, and how they were inspired to make music themselves. I found a lot of that quite relatable and quite inspiring, and I particularly enjoyed Steve's kind of unpretentious attitude towards making music. He's a complete beginner still at the age of 60 something, and the fact that he has the balls to go out and do that, whilst in the public eye still as a renowned sports celebrity, that's, I like that a lot. The timeline of the book does get a little bit muddled, because you're alternating between Steve and Carvus's chapters. Once Carvus enters Steve's story, as it were, you're kind of flip-flopping between younger Carvus and older Carvus in different chapters. It's not too confusing, but it does take a little bit of adjusting to. I suppose my other main criticism would be occasionally Steve does go off on non-musical tangents that I think probably could have been cut without harming the book, really. It never quite gets into sort of Alan Partridge, needless to say, I had the last laugh sort of territory, but it does get a little bit close at times, a little bit close for comfort. I think particularly there's one little bit where he's comparing the experience of touring as a sportsman with touring as a musician, and he goes off on a bit of a tangent about how annoying it is that post 9/11 he was no longer allowed to take his snooker cue as hand luggage on the plane. He seems to have kind of an axe to grind about that I don't think was necessary for the book, honestly. But, it's in there, and it doesn't take up that much time, but it just feels like a bit of an unneeded tangent. For me, the highlights of the book were the chapters on Cardiacs, obviously, and also Gong. Steve and Carvus kind of share narration duties in the chapter about Gong, as Steve talks about first interviewing David Allen of Gong for his radio show, which was how Carvus met David Allen and eventually joined Gong, which he still fronts after the sad death of David Allen. The chapter about David Allen's death and the memorial episode of the radio show that they did for him is particularly touching. And also very touching is Carvus's recollections about Tim Smith from Cardiacs, who died in 2020 after a long illness and disability. He talks very movingly about that. Given my personal connection with Cardiacs, how much their music means to me, it was quite difficult listening to that last chapter about the long illness and eventual passing of Tim Smith. But it was beautifully written and a wonderful tribute to someone that meant a lot to Carvus, obviously, and although I never had the pleasure of meeting Tim Smith, his music meant a lot to me as well. So yeah, overall, apart from a slightly muddled timeline and a couple of maybe unnecessary tangents, I really enjoyed this book, and I enjoyed the contrast between Steve and Carvis as narrators. Yeah, Steve has a very dry sense of humor. He can be quite blunt and quite irreverent. On the other hand, Carvis has more of a mystical quality, I think. He often talks of grand epiphanies from listening to music and cosmic significance, and he also talks very openly about his experience with psychedelic substances, which I have to say he makes them sound quite tempting. So beware if you read this book. I can't guess how effective it would be as a guidebook to someone who is completely uninitiated in the kind of music that they're talking about. I don't know how useful it would be at kind of introducing you to it, getting you into it, if you're not already into it. For me, I definitely took a few notes of bands that I needed to check out. For some reason, I'd managed, although I really like the band This Heat, I hadn't even heard of Camberwell Now, which was a kind of follow-up band. I ended up getting their album, and it's fantastic. I also ended up getting a big box set of Fred Frith albums, thanks to their chapter about Henry Cow and their various offshoots. I was already a fan of Henry Cow, but I'm getting way back into them at the moment. And yeah, that's a rabbit hole. So yeah, I can't promise it will get you into weird music if you're not already into it. But if you do share my passion and Stephen Carvis's passion for the more esoteric side of music, then I definitely recommend Medical Grade Music. And that's about it from me today. So I will see you when I see you.